Nyastos sat there, mounted on a horse. His red hair swayed in the wind as his relatively small purple eyes looked out on the dozens of roads, farms, and guard towers in front of the Imperium's capital. He himself was clad in wonderfully decorated armor, with the insignia of the griffin etched into his breastplate. He was old, a grand 130 years old even. Behind him, thousands of men, some clad in the robes of a sorcerer, others clad in steel armor, with runes carved into their shield to protect them from magic. To the right, his leading commander, Cersilla, Baroness of Kolstadt, approached him. "Sire, the mangonels have been loaded with exploding projectiles," she informed him. He nodded. "Excellent. Has Verulius reported back in?" he asked. He honestly cared very little for Verulius, but he was a useful pawn to enact his plans. He would earn Ryman's gaze. He would earn his place as a god, as a true Keezer, not one of the pretends that had plagued the Imperium for the past 1,000 years. "Make the sorcerers raise the ground so that our troops can get past the ditch with no issues. Then send walking corpses through the broken spots in the wall and make them absorb the first blows," he said as he turned his gaze towards the gate. "Once they think we are attacking through the walls, sent in the living statues, make them shatter the gate," he said. Cersilla nodded. "Understood, sire." She responded. "The enemy will most likely have stationed sorcerers and archers on the second set of walls." She said, "I doubt that our mangonels will be able to destroy them, considering the sorcerers will most likely form a magical barrier." The despot raised his hand to his chin. "That is problematic." He said he should have expected this. He was trying to conquer the capital after all. Even after decades of corruption and mismanagement, it could still put up a fight. He, however, had one trick up his sleeve. The Imperium was reliant on its talented sorcerers, and he had managed to sway a vast majority of them. In front of the walls of the capital stood the largest force of sorcerers seen since the times of Ryman and the other legends. It had taken decades of planning, scheming, and convincing, but he had formed an enormous, albeit unstable alliance of the various colleges of magic. Frankly, it was surprisingly easy. The Imperium was corrupt and decadent. Its nobility only held their positions not due to their own actions and virtues, but due to their ancestors. It disgusted Nyastos to see a nation of nobility and virtue being destroyed from the inside, to see commoners being pushed aside despite their qualities, despite their merit. He wanted to reform this corrupted mess. The Imperium was no longer Ryman's dream. It was his nightmare. He had a vision, a dream, a goal. That goal was simple. He wished to reform the Imperium to ensure that those who were competent, those who possessed the qualities that were required of a good leader, lead. A system wherein a person's lot in life is dependent on their parents, on their birth, is a system that is bound to fail. He would show the world that. A smile graced his lips. The actions he was currently conducting were virtuous, divinely ordained, and would lead to a brighter future. One where elvenkind rules supreme, one where the faithful, the ruthless, and the ambitious hold the power over the decadent, weak, and merciful, not the other way around. His mind snapped back to Cersilla that looked at him with a questioning gaze. Then he got an idea. "The sorcerers who will put up this shield, they are unlikely to expect an attack from below, yes?" he asked the commander. She nodded. "Yes, sire." Silence reigned for a few seconds until she put her hand up. "You wish for our earth mages to collapse the walls from below?" she asked. Nyastos nodded. "Indeed," he said. "We have the largest force of sorcerers ever assembled. We might as well make use of them. Rhymstadt never faced an attacker with more than a few druids. It is well protected against a conventional assault. A magical one has better odds," he said. "That isn't a bad idea. I'll inform the Grand Inquisitors of the magical colleges," she said as she spurred her horse and rode off to the Grand Inquisitor's tents. Before Nyastos could plan anything beyond his current plans, a messenger came riding up to him. The man looked exhausted and completely out of breath. Nyastos focused on the man. He saw bloodstains on his right arm. He, however, saw no arrow. It couldn't have been a sword cut either. Perhaps a fireball. The area did look like it was burned. The arm itself was only hanging on by a thread. "Sire, despot," he said as he dismounted and collapsed onto the ground. Before the man could continue any further, Niastos knelt down onto his level and handed him a pouch of water. You did your duty despite your injuries. You proved your courage, bravery, and strength of character, he said. He gestured towards his personal surgeon and healing sorcerer, who immediately attended to the scout. Most men would have surrendered to death, you didn't. That is virtuous in the eyes of the gods, he said. He stood back up. Now tell me, you come from Gruntharn. You bring news from Verulius, yes? He asked the man. He made sure to speak loudly. This was an excellent opportunity to raise morale, to increase his reputation as a stout leader who cared for those in his service, to show the world that merit was to be rewarded. Yes, sire, I do, he said, as he knelt down in front of Niastos. Verulius, he has been captured by the humans. They are currently holding him captive, he said between gasps of air. Trachurius still lives. The humans managed to somehow bypass the magical harness. A frown appeared on Niastos's face. Then it appears that these humans are more capable than I expected, he said out loud. Anything else? He asked. The scout nodded. Verulius managed to hand me Trachurius's research papers on the humans. He told me to give it you. The scout quickly handed with his one good arm, which was still shaking, Niastos a tattered, although still intact journal. How did you manage to get yourself injured to such a degree? The humans only possess excellent heavy infantry. I was informed of that, he asked the scout. They're infantry. They're armed with magic that isn't magic, sire, he said, still panting. Perhaps the journal will explain it further, sire, he said. Niastos nodded and grabbed 2 bronze revens and handed them to the scout. Buy yourself some drinks, he said as the scout hastily removed himself from his presence. The despot took the journal. He gestured towards his guards. Set up a tent, chair and desk for me. I wish to study this journal here. Of course, sire, the guard said as he hastily sped off to get a chair, tent, and desk. He might have underestimated the humans severely. These weren't just some mindless brutes incapable of science, magic, and the arts. If they could make magicless magic, it could mean 3 things. Either a deity, a god, or some other divine being granted them this ability, which was unlikely considering the humans displayed little to no religious zeal. They managed to discover a new form of magic. Although unlikely it wasn't impossible, his sorcerers hadn't detected any ternitia around humans. It could, however, be that they figured out a way to utilize another magical energy. The last solution to this rather perplexing question would be that their conventional means of observing and influencing the world were sufficient to pass as magic. That was perhaps the most dangerous answer of the 3. That would mean that besides weapons, magic, and armor, they understood the forces which made the world as it is. And if one understands something, it becomes 1,000 times easier to change it. In any case, he had matters to attend to. Verulius was dead. The humans would see the attempted assassination of Trachurius as a provocation, and most likely launch an assault or be hostile towards his new imperium. If he had done more thorough research, and not just made assumptions based on a limited amount of information, that wouldn't have been a problem. He had, however, made his attack under the assumption that the humans were a force he could defeat with ease, and that provoking them into attacking him was to lead to a glorious victory. He could still salvage the situation, however, he needed to blame somebody. He could say that a criminal lord or a power-hungry usurper had claimed to be him, that he had been framed. He could also say that this power-hungry usurper was the current Keyser, that could maybe even earn the favor of the humans. Indeed, he just needed to give the current Keyser a motive. He needed to plant evidence of his guilt. That, however, wouldn't be a problem. Indeed, within a few days he would be inside the imperial palace, if everything went well, at least. Still, he needed a backup plan. He couldn't let all his plans be ruined by an utterly random and unpredictable third party. He turned towards one of his guards. Call Gurdian. I need to speak with him. The guard nodded and ran off to get the man. In the meantime, his chair, table, and tent had been set up and ready. 2 men, both clad in richly decorated heavy armor, guarded the tent. His personal guard. He entered the tent, placed the journal on the table, and sat down on the chair. He needed to have a chat with his spymaster about the current events. The sword and the hammer weren't tools to solve the human issue anymore. A pen and knife would have much better results. Tricurius's eyes opened as he started to regain consciousness. He took in the world surrounding him. He was in a white room. The light, it was intense. The world looked so foggy and vague. He tried to focus on something and partially succeeded. There was a human, in a white coat. He laid his head back on the pillow. He just now noticed he was in a bed. What had happened? The last memory he could still recall he was being carried out of a room his kidnapper, Verulius, had captured him in. How did the humans knock both of them unconscious? Perhaps they manipulated the very air. That would be both frightening and enticing. If such a thing were possible, it could lead to so many things. Ambassador Tricurius, the human in the white coat said, "I'm Dr. Naomi Nowak. You might feel a bit dizzy. It will pass within 10 minutes or so," she said. "Right," the elven ambassador said as he tried to straighten himself. "Where's Verulius? What happened, doctor?" she asked the woman. "How do I put this?" she said as he contemplated her words. "We altered the air so that you were knocked unconscious. Verulius is currently being held in a high-security cell," she said. The implications of this accident could ruin his career and reputation, his very livelihood. Despot Neastos was trying to usurp the throne, and considering how very flawed the Imperium was, it wouldn't surprise Tricurius if he would succeed. Usurping the title of Kaiser would involve successfully besieging Reimstadt, however. Whatever Neastos's intentions were, in Tricurius's eyes, he was power-hungry lunatic. His aggressive policies would surely spell the downfall of the Imperium, and what would succeed it? Chaos and death, thousands of counts, despots and dukes fighting each other to restore the Imperium or to expand their own domain. "When you're feeling well, I'd advise you to eat meal, drink some water, bathe, and talk to Ambassador Patricia. She said she wished to speak with you," the doctor said as she walked out of the room. "If there's something wrong, just say it." Tricurius nodded as the doctor exited the room. He got up and, although it was difficult, managed to get out of the bed he had been placed in. His clothes were still on, although he would probably have to change them eventually. It would do for the upcoming 20 minutes. He exited the room. The room his bed was in had 2 guards guarding the door. He went to his own private quarters. When he arrived, he took a shower and put on a different set of clothes. Then he went to the cafeteria, eager to eat something. He ordered some bread alongside, something humans called bacon and eggs. He drank plain water. After he was finished eating his meal, he called his 2 knights to accompany him to the human ambassador. He wondered what this was about. Well, he knew what it was about. The attempt to kill him, of course. He just pondered what the ULE would do about it. Would they intervene? Would they attempt to reconcile with Neastos? Would they try to kill Neastos? Who knows? When Tricurius arrived at the ambassador's office, he was surprised to find Carlson standing in front of it, with 2 guards accompanying him. "Ambassador Tricurius, please follow me," he said as he gestured towards the right hallway. Tricurius nodded his and complied. They walked through a dozen hallways until they reached a particularly large hall. In the center of the hall was a large chair with an elevated desk. Surrounding the desk there were a dozen or so benches. The walls were decorated with stained glass. The stained glass was portraying globes, rotating around a large yellow object, and in particular a green with blue globe. Around the hall were several large banners. One of them was a globe surrounded by a crown of leaves. The globe in particular was completely gold, with the exception of strange shapes which were white. Another one of the banners was red. In the center, there was a rocky globe, which was completely white. Yet another one of the flags was a yellow star surrounded by several other yellow stars on a completely red banner. Indeed, the variety in these banners was staggering, and yet each one of them was most likely made by masterful artisans, as they looked magnificent. The floor itself was made out of brown tiles, each one masterfully inserted and unstained. On the ceiling of the hall, there hung several lamps, each one of them decorated with silver and gold. Creating such wonders must cost a fortune. "Good afternoon, Ambassador Tricurius," a female voice rang out, the human ambassador. Tricurius composed himself. "Salutations, Ambassador," he said. My apologies for the rather meager haul. We had to build it in a few days, Patricia said, as she gestured towards a chair in front opposite of her own. Take a seat, Ambassador, she said. Tricurius desperately tried to not look impressed. If this was considered meager, what was considered majestic? A hall such as this one could rival the Imperial throne room. That was a truly impressive feat. And this was built in just a few days, if the ambassador was to be believed. I've heard about the attempt on your life. I must apologize for letting such a thing happen in the first place, the human ambassador said. Tricurius raised his hands. The blame isn't yours, he said. Imperial authorities will arrest the man responsible for this. He doubted that himself. The current imperial government was under siege. It was quite unlikely they'd spent their precious forces to try and save some mostly unimportant ambassador. About that, the woman said. Are you familiar with Despot Nyastos IV of Kararum? She asked him. Tricurius should have expected they would want to get involved. Then again, why wouldn't he let them get involved? Let the humans do the dirty work and ensure that the old Kaiser once again rules over the Imperium, morally questionable? Sure, the current Kaiser was corrupt and a fool, but still better than the chaos and unrest that would follow if Nyastos usurped the throne. Unfortunately, I am, Tricurius said. Then you'll be aware that he's currently besieging your capital? The human ambassador asked. Yes, not that the capital being under siege is a rare occurrence. Tricurius said, civil wars and wars of succession aren't uncommon in the slightest. The thing is, Reimstadt, the capital can resist nearly every conventional military assault. Patricia said. You're also aware that he has gathered a significant force of sorcerers? She said. How well is Reimstadt defended against a magical assault? She asked. Depends, define a large force for me, Tricurius asked. Several thousands, almost every single one of your colleges, she said. Well, Reimstadt was going to fall within a few days if that was the case. Nyastos was overly ambitious and reckless, but he wasn't an idiot. When Tricurius did work for the despot, he found that he was quite competent and shrewd. Not just that, but he had an eye for talent. That last trait, however, could also spell his eventual defeat. He refused to listen to priests or listen to his betters. It was tragic. Then again, were the priest and his betters truly better? The last couple weeks had forced Tricurius to change his outlook not just on the Imperium, but to life in general. Regardless of his moral purity, he would still usher in an age of chaos when his overly aggressive ideas would inevitably lead to his downfall, and he'd take the Imperium with him. Then I doubt that Reimstadt will last for more than a few days, to be completely frank, Tricurius said. Reimstadt wasn't built to resist a magical assault. It was meant to last against millions of footmen and archers, not sorcerers. Patricia let out an exasperated sigh. Then the Imperium will fall, she said. There's also a chance Nyastos was framed, she said. Although that last one has to be confirmed before Nyastos can be considered innocent or guilty. If Nyastos is guilty, what will you do? Tricurius asked. Well, that's why I asked you to come, she said. We cannot support the current Kaiser Eufulius. Even if we would secure his position, he'd face constant revolts and would most likely continue mismanaging the Imperium. She said, supporting Nyastos, even if he has tried to negotiate with us, would be risky. How so? Tricurius asked. If he manages to usurp the throne, he'll most likely be revered by the colleges of magic, and with his skill for intrigue, it is unlikely he would fail to appease the nobility. Perhaps the chance he's lying about being framed isn't small, however, she said. Besides, it would mean declaring war on the majority of Naravor, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. So who are you going to support, then? Tricurius asked. That's where you come in, she said. Do you know of anyone else with a strong claim on the throne? She asked. Tricurius scratched his chin. I do, he said. However, I need to get some in return. Information is more valuable than any currency, after all. What do you wish for? Patricia asked. I wish to apply for residence within ULE-controlled territory. Tricurius said, if Nyastos usurps the throne, there's a large chance I'll get caught in some unfortunate accident leading to my death, Tricurius said. Patricia nodded. All right, I agree. she said. I'll hand you the paperwork after you give me the information. There's 2 people. Tricurius said, First, there's the bastard of the father of the current Kaiser. He said, Gupian is his name, although I'd advise against putting him on the throne if you wish for peace. Why exactly, if I may ask? Patricia asked. Gupian is a Templar, which is as violent a profession as it sounds. Tricurius said, They hunt monsters, enemies of the Imperium, and their whole ethos is based around Ryman, and Ryman's whole thing is conquest and glory. So, who's the second candidate? Patricia asked. That would be Sarnatian the Elder, Tricurius said in a matter-of-fact tone. He's the uncle of Gapian and the current Kaiser. He's currently living in exile somewhere in Valand. Valand? Patricia asked. It's the home of the orcs. He's currently the arbiter of the Falkund village. Tricurius. I was ordered to spy on him on the orders of Neastos.